and welcome to the Raw Preview Podcast. I'm Adam Wilborn from What Culture, joined by the Dudley Boys of What Culture, Michael Hamlet and Michael Sidgwick, to look ahead to tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, for daily wrestling podcasts, where we not only review Raw and SmackDown, but also the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT. Pay-per-views, we have interviews, roundtable discussions, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on Wrestle Culture. As I said, though, joined by Michael Hamlet and Michael Sidgwick to look ahead to Raw tonight. We are live here on YouTube, so if you want any questions, ask the boys, please do stick them in the comments, and I'll try to get them in due course. But let's look ahead to tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw. Before we do that, though, I'd love to know your guys' reaction to this recent news surrounding the WWE Fan Council survey. Basically, there's this big thing sent out to WWE fans to try and gauge their reaction to potential ideas that WWE could have. They were talking about potentially shooting more movie-like sequences and action scenes and what we've seen in recent months from them. Potentially copying AEW by putting people in the crowd, including wrestlers. But the most important and intriguing one was, quote, supernatural/fantastic touches during the show. Fans were sent this. It was tweeted out by someone called Mike Palmer on Twitter, saying that would detract from his enjoyment. But when does that ever stop WWE? Michael Sidgwick, do you think we could see some more sort of supernatural directions from the Fed?
The Fed? Piss off. I don't know, it's one of those weird things, right, where I've tried to explain the difference before of the difference between like wrestling audiences. Like the TV audience is markedly different to what I would call the squared circle audience or the message board audience or like the depths of wrestling Twitter audience, where what we think is going to get over or what should get over, Ricochet or Cesaro being in the main event, is not what the actual TV audience believes or wants, because they are often quite silent during a really great match between a Ricochet and a Cesaro if they're not pushed prominently as the stars of the show. And one thing that is absolutely endemic to Squared Circle is this idea that supernatural characters, even if they're crap, are like default amazing. We see it right now with Dexter Lumis. He does this thing with his eyes. He has Stranger Things music, and he does the worst Big Boss Man spot you've ever seen. And yet there are huge pockets of people on Reddit Squared Circle who think this guy's great because he's just a bit spooky. I can't fathom it. It's when Paige had the absolute temerity to not become Sister Abigail with black hair and like a tits out with paler skin, getting the dirty work done for Bray Wyatt. It was a sacrilege that there was no Sister Abigail. There had to be a goth, emo, big titty girlfriend. Otherwise, the whole act was dead. In Sister Abigail, there was no mythology. There has to be tits in this mythology. It's Sister Abigail. People love supernatural characters in WWE, except the casual audience who actually watches it. So it depends who they want to appeal to, because Jesus Christ, there are people who will call Aleister Black the next Undertaker with no evidence supporting that whatsoever, because the bloody floorboard that he comes out to on the middle of the ring is creaky, and it's a bit like Hammer Horror.
It's a bit like a coffin in reverse, isn't it? So, they'll take it.
Pranav in the comments says, as long as it's not like the Bray Randy match, I'm okay with some supernatural stuff. House of Fury, thank you for your donation, says, if PG-13 supernatural is allowed, then fine. And Daz4785 says, supernatural is better than generic crap. It works. Hamlet, your thoughts on this?
I respect anybody in a certain sort of like feeling of desperation, looking for something more from the wrestling at the moment, looking for that proper escape, looking for an escape as a viewer from the empty arena, or if like the way Dynamite makes matches on the reg isn't working for you, just something that feels different. So I do get that. What I find odd here about is this particular choice of words, supernatural, because it feels to me, if we're to look at a recent example of what might have triggered most people that fill in these WWE surveys to ask for more, is probably the Boneyard match from WrestleMania. The Boneyard match, which featured The Undertaker returning to the least supernatural version of himself. So I think there's honestly a confusion between what people want in this difficult time to just escape into versus what they'd probably want long term. We've even seen with Money in the Bank as an argument that I sense that myself and Sidgwick were in the minority of, but we've even seen that it is possible for this medium in this form not to just magically work for everybody. WrestleMania's uses of it were, I'd say, broadly considered a success, regardless of what you thought of either one. The praise was high enough in some circles that both would be considered a massive success. Money in the Bank less so, but it worked for enough people. So I think cinematic will remain a big and key feature of all mainstream pro wrestling until we get crowds back. But Supernatural worries me a little bit because I honestly don't think people necessarily know what they're asking for. Cedric's point about Sister Abigail and Paige is like, it's so spot on, because if they brought Paige in, then Sister Abigail would no longer be supernatural. She'd be there in living color in front of you. There would be no mythology. There would be no sort of like mystery surrounding what exactly power she has. It'd be like if like an actual physical person was hiding inside the Undertaker's urn instead of the ashes or the green smoke, the magic and mythology of that magical power that could help this mythological, like this sort of supernatural character. I'm not so sure the company's got the creative dexterity to pull it off unless we do cinematic matches. So I think maybe those two things are being conflated rather than us just getting a return to sort of weird sci-fi or spooky BS.
Sidge, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Mr. Phoenix has donated. Thank you for this. Saying WWE's problem is they always aim for the folks that will be fans with mainstream guests and whatnot. When if they appeal to the fans that they already have, their excitement would be a far better advertisement.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Mr. Phoenix, and thank you for your donation. It always seems to me that there's a desperate aspirational quality to so much of what WWE does. Yet when you look at, this is my thoughts personally, when I look at something to watch or listen to, I kind of sometimes follow the direction of buzz and acclaim. And if something is getting lauded and talked about in these like hugely reverent tones, then I'll gravitate towards it. And that's usually the case of like a really accomplished musician delivers like a mid-career masterpiece, and there's this brand value like tied up with this critical acclaim. You think, all right, well, I must listen to this. I absolutely must listen to this. Or there's this huge breakthrough, brand new TV show that everyone is talking about. You feel like you're missing out on this incredible thing and the escapism conversations that come with it. If something has its own word of mouth, irrespective of whether it's a genre I usually gravitate towards, like I will probably check it out. It's the same with The Last Dance. Like I liked basketball enough in the 90s because literally everyone liked it. That's what makes The Last Dance such a phenomenal documentary. And even though it's not something I've kept up with for years and years and years and years, it tells what assuredly is the most incredible story to ever emerged from the sport of basketball. And it's so well told, and it's so knotty and fascinating and dense that I'm following it on the documentary every step of the way. And I don't really like basketball. The story transcends the medium. And if WWE actually knuckled down, did some really incredible creative stuff with the limitless financial resources that they have and the abundant talent that they have to create something worthy of itself, and people really start to talk about, oh, WWE's back, you know, it's as great as it was, I'd honestly gather that a not inconsiderable amount of people would let them go to the product. Don't desperately reach out with celebrities and bluster and marketing. Let the people come to you first. I'm certain that this is the correct way around.
Yeah, I think more cinematic than supernatural. And like you say, Sidge, I think there needs to be a far more considered approach, which is not exactly what WWE is famed for nowadays, at the very least. Right, let's transition and talk about tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw. Lots to look forward to. We've got King Corbin showing up to take on Drew McIntyre.
Shut up, man.
Edge's response to Randy Orton for the best wrestling match ever, and an axe throwing contest. But before all that bollocks, Michael Hamflett, could tonight we see, I'm seeing you two both taking your headphones out of here before I even say it. Could we see the WWE Women's Tag Team Championships go back to the Iconics? It's Billy Bloody Kay, it's Peyton Bloody Royce. They're taking on Alexa Bloody Bliss and Nikki Bloody Cross tonight. Michael Hamflett, could we see a title change hands?
Sorry, let me just put these back in as I mask the one sound worse than my screaming children downstairs. Yeah, I think we will. Like, I think, and you're a snake, by the way, because you were just talking about a considered approach. Like, you weren't going to line this preview up with anything more than the Iconics as the headline match. I really think we will. Right, they're a tag team, and that's what this women's division hasn't really had until WWE squeezed a couple together in the form of the Kabuki Warriors and Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross. Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross doing a moment of bliss, which is never good. Does that really benefit them having the belts there as props while it happens? I don't think so. The Iconics are on the bump later this week, and I keep seeing them featured in various WWE marketing material, and it just feels too coordinated. And this is in a time, as we've discussed in sort of reviews of these shows, where they can be coordinated and they can be joined up. I'm going to mention the bump again, like it's important. I know it's not, but last Wednesday, Todd Pettengill was on the bump. They talked about a Dream in Your House match between Adam Cole and Bret Hart. We should have seen the NXT announcement coming. It was hiding there in plain sight. Why? Because they're recording all these things in advance and they can actually appear joined up again. And this feels dangerously close to another case of that. I'm less cross than I was. This is the thing, right? All my anger towards the Iconics is directed towards how they won the titles the last time. And more importantly, why? Yes, there was 2 YouTube videos where we all popped at Billie Kay screaming in people's faces. That was great. But I wasn't massively keen on brand new titles being killed in the space of 3 months. That wasn't on them. So let's give them a second chance, I suppose. I can't see past them winning tonight. I just can't. Cedric?
Are you throwing to me? I don't care.
Help us out. Yeah, that's just... I don't know whether to diffuse Wilborn's enthusiasm or just steer into it at this point.
Honestly, just chuck more coal on the fire because I'm buzzing about all this. And for once, rather than just coming on here, pulling faces and shouting catchphrases like I do, to be honest, 99% of the time, I've done some research. Tonight is 6 months to the day since they last had a really proper match against Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch. Granted, they had the match last week to sort of qualify for this one, but yeah, 6 months to the day since they just disappeared off our screens, basically.
So why are they championship caliber athletes?
Because they are the greatest women's tag team champions in history, and they deserve this shot. And also, to put all my to put all my banter aside, we talk about the likes of Asuka and Otis and their success in the empty arena era. I think you need someone like Billy Bloody Kay and Payne Bloody Royce in this time period where you don't have any fans because it sells sells your product a lot better.
So you know what? That's not a bad point at all. That's not a bad point at all. I can imagine Billy Kay, if she's actually allowed or encouraged to express herself, then she could do some interesting things ringside that aren't the most boring gentleman's threes between really good wrestlers you've ever seen in the entire bloody life.
Yeah, and plus I think someone like Alexa Bliss needs to be cut free and allowed to do some singles stuff. Your thoughts on Daz 4785's comment, Sidge, that you can see Nikki turning on Alexa costing them?
Ooh, it seems like the wrong way around because Alexa Bliss is a genuinely inspirational figure. I do admire the hell out of Alexa Bliss, the person behind the character, obviously. Yeah, she's excellent at playing the heel. And Nikki Cross just seems like such an effervescent and nice personality that you wouldn't expect that to be the way around. But, it wouldn't be like them to get it wrong.
Let's talk a little bit about Drew McIntyre and King Corbin now, Hamfler. It's the first brand-to-brand invitation wildcard 2.0 thing that we've got. Is this just going to be a one-off, or God forbid, could this set up a title match at Backlash?
I hope it's a one-off, but I fear the worst, to be honest. Corbin can lose tonight and we could still get a title match at Backlash. That's the worst thing about it. He's impervious to his own defeats in the booking. He just loses and loses and loses. His record, as somebody kindly informed me on Twitter, is something like he's lost 20 times this year, and he remains such a featured and pushed performer. He was the first recipient of this brand invitation thing, despite being a proven ratings disease. So USA Network have gotten him as supposedly a gift, when really he's anything but that. He was a disaster in this exact role for Seth Rollins at this exact point last year. If for nothing else, I've got a morbid curiosity to see if the pretty good Drew McIntyre character can survive interacting with Baron Corbin. Just the fact that these two are going to come together should be the biggest test for this Drew gimmick so far. As we've sort of discussed before, they've sort of stumbled onto an actual earnest top baby face when there's nobody around to receive him. So let's see if he can keep that with no sort of crowd, with no pressure of fans getting utterly bored rigid by Baron Corbin's chin locks. Like, if Drew can maintain everything that he's worked quite hard to do so since WrestleMania. I'm intrigued once, but I think that's a problem. I sense it won't just be once.
Corbin lost on SmackDown, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course he did. So
in a tournament for a title below this one.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, naturally. There's two things that have happened here, right? Neither of them are good. Either Vince McMahon has said that what's going to happen is that these moron fans who watch this product don't have the capacity to remember what happened 3 days ago. So they'll just forget and they won't care. And Baron Corbin can just have a match with a WWE champion, and we are to receive it as this unpredictable contest between two evenly matched athletes. And we're just meant to forget that he's lost. Or he's forgotten that he was scheduled to wrestle on Raw and green-lighted that finish, or greenlit whatever, that finish on Friday. Either he's not operating at 100% capacity, which is a euphemism for something that's significantly worse, or he thinks you're a moron. Why would you watch this product? Why am I the negative one for burying it? Like, it's ridiculous. And it's not as if it's like two really strong wrestlers. It's one really strong wrestler and one guy who, I don't want to be too scathing in my assessment of the man, but he's got no redeeming features. He's not an exciting wrestler, and his ratings poison. So why this is happening is absolutely beyond me, and I could not care less.
Just to move away from Monday Night Raw very briefly, we're just getting reports through of some breaking news surrounding ex-WWE superstar Shad Gaspard. This coming in from TMZ. He is currently missing after being pulled up by a strong rip current on Sunday afternoon. Lifeguards attended the scene. Gaspard's son, who was with him, was rescued, according to reports. One witness said that whilst the rescue was going on, Shad directed the rescuers to save his son first, but he was pulled out by the current. No word on that yet, but just getting reports of that coming in. Awful news to hear about, and we'll keep you posted, of course, on any developments with that. Shad Gaspard, of course, part of Crime Time. Tough to hear that. He's a close friend of What Cultures. And as I said, we'll keep you posted on any developments that we get from that. But yes, just to reiterate, TMZ reports coming in that Shad Gaspard currently missing after being pulled out by a strong rip current on Sunday afternoon over in Venice Beach in Florida. But we'll keep you posted on any developments with that. Returning to WWE Monday Night Raw, Michael Hamflett, we've got the response from Edge to look forward to tonight with Randy Orton, seemingly set up a match at Backlash that one senses will probably not be the end of their feud either.
Yes, I think this is going to be a yes from Edge. And I think what they'll do here is, because they've already talked this up as this great wrestling match, which there's a meta quality to promoting this match, because they are acknowledging that WrestleMania was a failure. I know Edge came out, and I think he said that Bret Hart privately had contacted him to say it was great, and who am I to question Bret the Hitman Hart's opinion on wrestling? I was wrong about Edge and Randy Orton after all. But the general consensus was that match just did not work. There was a lot of problems with its presentation, and they'll be looking to rectify that at Backlash. So I think Edge will say yes here. I dare say this might even main event, because in the absence of a crowd, they're going to have to try and find a way to give Edge's second proper match after the Royal Rumble back, more prestige again. He's worthy of a platform, and he's just not getting one because of this environment. So I sense they'll go quite big and quite heavy with this one. Money in the Bank was, guys are going to get chucked off the roof. WrestleMania was boneyard match and blah, blah, blah. This one, they might actually just put it on the poster, the best wrestling match ever. And what pressure to put on these two, but then I kind of feel like they've walked into it here. And yes, I sense this could be a trilogy, because if they're keeping their fingers crossed about this rumored SummerSlam move that would allow them to get people in the building, maybe they're looking at paying this whole thing off there.
So I have to collect my thoughts. That news about Shad Gaspard's really knocked me for six. That's absolutely awful. But that's horrendous. That we've like what a heroic act. No, that's absolutely horrible. Yeah, bear with me a second. That's really not nice. Yeah, this match doesn't really do anything for me. Like, even if, the match at WrestleMania was punishingly dull. I had literally no idea what they were thinking, making it go that long. They had so much sort of new space to play with. They had so many like story beats to hit, and yet all they seemed to do for the 40-minute duration was take turns taking these incredibly violent bumps that just sounded awful, and they had no like satisfying pro wrestling impact. Where as much as I like ghoulish pro wrestling bumps, you're always secure in the knowledge that they are landing mostly on the flat surface of their backs and they are protecting themselves, and it's an emulation of something that is ostensibly meant to really hurt. I got none of that from Edge versus Randy Orton. I got none of the excitement, like a risk worth it, like a high flying move. I just thought it was one of the dumbest and worst matches I've literally ever seen in my entire life. And the fact that it was so long meant it was just unforgivable. So that's hardly informing my excitement ahead of tonight's show, particularly since it's the parody of last week's marketing that it is apparently going to be the greatest wrestling match of all time. I mean, I know Hamflet's just said that they seem to have been self-aware in the promotion of this match, but maybe they're going to take the reception to it, which they finally acknowledged as motivation. Maybe that's going to drive them to, in fact, wrestle the greatest wrestling match of all time. I personally can't see that happening because it's Randy Orton and it's 2020. And he literally had his best match 16 years ago.
Like, they can't even have the best match in this era. Like last week alone, like Gulak and Bryan was really good. Drew and Seth was pretty great. And that's surely the ceiling for these matches, isn't it? Pretty good.
Omega and Trent.
Sorry, no, in WWE, I mean specifically.
All right, of course.
Like,
of course.
Like 3 1/4, the most generous of 4s, if you're being generous. Like, I don't know if anything can really just in a standard match setting in that performance center or anywhere else they want to host it. I don't think anything can be achieved beyond that.
It strikes me that they are really reaching here, and one sense is that it's going to be a match that Randy Orton probably wins, so they can do some sort of rubber match. I think someone in the news today perhaps suggested a 3 stages of hell match for SummerSlam once fans can finally come back. So I hope they can have the Edge moment again and, like you say, do a make good with this program. But that was one of the reasons why Raw was so popular last week, and it was one of our favorite shows in recent weeks, Monday Night Raw last week. Sige, and that we also saw the announcement, of course, Becky Lynch pregnant, great news there, and Asuka becoming Raw Women's Champion. What's next for Asuka, Sige?
You think that there's an incredibly simplistic route to take in that Asuka was extremely happy to simply accept the title. So one of 2 things could happen, and each could put over like either the challenger or the champion. You could have Asuka cut a promo in that wonderful, wonderful way of hers and have it essentially translated on commentary once she peppers in the odd bit of English to claim that she doesn't quite feel worthy of being the champion and she demands the division's best to come out and confront her right now. That would be a good babyface move. If in fact that matters, Asuka is so entertaining right now that she could be this sort of gleeful, mischievous, I got it and didn't really work for it. And it would show everything about what a babyface characteristic should be. And I would pop my tits off her anyway because it's Asuka and she's so entertaining. So failing that kind of trad method, have Shayna Baszler come out, or maybe not Shayna Baszler. I don't know, maybe Shayna Baszler's, but we get it over with. That match would be disappointing if it was really anticipated anyway, with the way they book long term. Have Shayna Baszler come out and just say, you are absolutely undeserving of that title. I've been stomping a mud hole through this entire division, so I'm going to come out and take it from you. And then thus setting up a match. It just feels like the nature of Asuka's win just facilitates such an easy story to tell. So let's wait for them to bugger it up.
Before I get your thoughts, we talked a little bit about this last week, the fact that it's come at a time where it's just seemingly refreshed the entire Raw Women's division. I mean, yes, Shayna Baszler is an obvious suggestion there. You could have a Kairi Sane match between Asuka and her former partner, which would be really intriguing. And we saw reports that the original plans for Money in the Bank saw Becky Lynch defend against Nia Jax. Should she be dropped in here against Asuka for you?
So why she got pregnant?
Yeah, I quite like the Nia Jax angle for that reason, because that's exactly what Nia Jax will say. I think they could acknowledge that the reason Becky Lynch is disappearing is because she remained terrified of Nia Jax eventually returning. They've got a story there that they never really went back to outside of Becky pushing her into some ladders backstage once about obviously Nia breaking Becky's nose, and Nia can throw around the accusations free of any consequence with Becky being gone. I'm into the Shayna pitch from Sidgwick, but it's a plea on my part really for patience. There are things that can wait, and Shayna on a tear through the division can continue quite a while longer before we need to get to Asuka and her. As much as I would like to see that, I don't really want to see it in this version. Whereas Nia Jax is something I would be quite willing to see them get to Backlash with Asuka and Nia, because I think they can tell a very simplistic but very solid story where Nia just uses her physical dominance, but Asuka prevails because she's got such a stronger all-round game. They've wrestled before and told that similar tale, and it tends to work pretty well. Asuka's charisma from last week's segment with Becky will surely turn her babyface in general, if even there was anything left of that act that was even a heel. I think from this empty arena era onwards, it's her as a heel wasn't long for the world. But I think the amount they've replayed her celebration of Becky's pregnancy suggests to me that they're going to go in hard on her being the deserving babyface rather than the entitled one that's kind of looked into winning the belt.
Finally, before we move on to some of the questions we've been receiving, thank you so much for all your questions and donations in the comments. Sid, you changed my opinion 180 degrees last week around the whole Street Profits Viking Raiders thing. And tonight we are having an axe throwing contest. How are you feeling?
Extremely positive about that particular segment, at least. It just feels like outside of the box thinking that is completely contrarian to what WWE has mostly been secure enough to do with these empty arena shows, and that is basically produce shows that would have happened had this unfolding crisis not happened. And I just find it ridiculous. I just feel like this is a really creative means of using just the circumstances to create a new story, a new type of story. We've seen it's an echo, obviously, of the MVP Matt Hardy stuff that we've seen. We've seen tropes like this in pro wrestling before, of guys selling at things you wouldn't expect them to excel at. Famous segments with Kamala and bowling alleys and the like. So it would be really cool for this one for the Street Profits to outwit the Viking Raiders and get one up on the old axe throwing. I just think there's simple, easy gags, but it just feels like that's precisely the sort of levity that is required, not these sort of grinding gentlemen's 3-star efforts in front of no fans. This is exactly what I'm up for. I've wanted the full embrace of a Treehouse of Horror era, and this precisely is that.
My futile hope for all this is that after the fact, they've now got these things existing as precedent. So when writers remind Vince McMahon, oh, well, we did do axe throwing and basketball once, he'll forget that was in the empty arena era and it was by necessity. And that'll allow this sort of stuff back into general storytelling as and when wrestling returns to normal. I think this era has indeed forced a bit of innovation and a bit of something else. It's not always been outside the box, but it's at least been interesting and different. And I just hope that they get used as a reminder of how this can work, because it would work just as well with crowds too. This kind of thing, it would be a welcome distraction on those 3-hour Raws.
Yeah, my prediction for tonight is Street Profits do far better than we expect, but I can already see the image of Eric and Ivar both throwing an axe at the target, and Eric's hitting the center of the target right in the middle, and then Ivar's basically getting smacked right into the back of the axe because they're so bloody good at axe throwing. But we'll have to wait and see. Just a bit of light and shade is nice to see, I suppose, on WWE program, which is what Sidgwick has been crying out for a long time. Right, let's quickly run through some questions we've received. Thank you so much for your donations and questions in the comment section. Mr. Phoenix says, when trying to get someone to watch wrestling, do you show them a 5-star classic or show them the NXT classic One Last Beat and then tell them about the regular stuff afterwards? Hamlet, why don't you take this one?
Neither. Absolutely neither. I think wrestling is either one of them things you get and want to watch, or you simply don't. But it still remains a battle of good versus evil. Just don't show one final beat to anyone ever. Like, I don't think even Adam Wilborn on his happiest day would watch one final beat again. But certainly, like, if you're going to go with a 5-star classic, pick something along the lines of, and I use this because it worked on my 3-year-old son last year, Daniel Bryan and Kofi Kingston from WrestleMania, but more because the lines are very clear between who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And in-ring work doesn't betray that. If you're explaining to a complete outsider why somebody does something and then they contradict what you're trying to say to help them understand the story, then it kind of like ruins their interest. And at no point will wrestlers like that in a story like that let you down.
Yeah, I've tried to show the missus Orange Cassidy versus Pac because Orange Cassidy's on such a different wavelength to like the few wrestling events I've dragged my wife to are the ones that she's caught me watching, and it does feel like caught. It does feel like the word caught because it's pro wrestling. Pamphlet says like if you're inclined to get it, you love it. If you're not, it's just a complete and utter like mystery to you. But she didn't like Orange Cassidy either, so. Just like my crack half the time, if you can believe that.
Matt, somebody does. It's Matt Rains. Matt Rains says, afternoon, guys. Just getting ready to chug an IPA. Anyways, next question, just a donation for my 3 favourite lads. Yes, you too, Hamlet. Thank you, lads. Thank you, Matt, for your donation. And Nebraska fan 77 says, with Becky Lynch now gone for the foreseeable future, who in the women's division can be the one that takes the brass ring she's leaving behind? Siege, why don't you take this one?
I mean, if it's not already Asuka, then... See, it's a tricky one, this, because I always thought if you look at how talented she is to how little they did with her in her original role and how much she over-delivered in the role she's in now, considering it's so like antithetical to her actual personality and what she got over being, then there's lots and lots left to do with Kairi Sane, in my opinion. There really, really is. I know she doesn't typically fit in with the overly verbose way that WWE produces television, but if we're being very generous and optimistic, perhaps Asuka is completely blown the bloody doors off how they will promote talent that don't necessarily speak English well as their foreign language, their prominent first language. So yeah, Kairi Sane, if given the opportunity, could really do that. But I do remember now, halfway through, expressing this thought that she was angling to leave. So maybe not. If not her, then I've always, well, not always, but very recently been impressed by Liv Morgan. Not at promos, Jesus Christ, but in-ring work and just total willingness and ability to improve. I think she's been really impressive.
Hamlet, we've seen, I saw earlier on, I should say, someone describe Sonya Deville as the new trending queen of WWE.
Yeah, I say it's tricky because we kind of view her as a SmackDown wrestler and thus she can't go to Raw. But they've already broken the brand invitation in the first week by putting AJ Styles in that SmackDown tournament. So I think she could quite easily step into that role because that role, as Becky Lynch proved, was kind of impervious to the brand extension. Where she went was the biggest show because for a while she was the biggest star. Sonya Deville's been great for ages. The in-ring's been good, but on very short supply because it's been in tag matches or she's been left out entirely. And these promos have been lurking around on those WWE.com interviews for ages. The ones that we're now seeing on SmackDown are pretty much her getting to flex what she's been doing behind the scenes or like in very, very, very small windows of opportunity for the longest time. So she seems to me at the moment on SmackDown, at least, the favorite to break out underneath the ongoing Bayley and Sasha Banks storyline on a sort of half-decent women's division. Over on Raw, I think Cedric's bang on. Kairi Sane and Liv Morgan, for admittedly entirely different reasons, feel like they're just on the bubble at the moment. And if WWE wanted to try all over again with Kairi Sane, I genuinely don't think people would remember that they'd already failed once with her as a babyface.
Final question today comes from Mr. Phoenix, who says, I'm pitching Aaliyah and Green versus Catanzaro and Carter at In Your House. Winner faces the champs, the Iconics, of course, on the same night. Hamlet is our resident In Your House super fan. What do you reckon to that?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's well-intentioned booking from Mr. Phoenix to want to give those guys an opportunity, but I'm a believer in one of the things about takeovers prestige being about how much you need to earn your way onto those cards. You need to have had a reasonable CV of matches that warrant a spot on a show that does its best to be the most kind of prestigious thing that WWE has going for it, In Your House branding or otherwise. And I just think there's too many more talents, too many more feuds, and wrestlers in general are probably going to take a spot from those four. Television-wise, they're still building. Like in the future, absolutely, but not now.
Hopefully we see more tag team title defenses on across all shows though, Sidge.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where until it actually happens, I can't possibly forecast something like that in good faith. Those titles are completely secondary concern to that company. So I honestly forget that they exist. Completely forget that they exist. Nothing surrounding them arouses my interest whatsoever. They kind of pissed me off actually with those titles because it was incredibly insulting to the intelligence to build them up in such a way that they did. I know realistically the way that certain teams qualified for them and how certain teams didn't have to was very messy. But in terms of the hype, they went big on those titles and then they just took a giant dump on them like after a month. And it made me feel like silly for thinking that they would actually take them seriously beyond an initial, oh, we can do this at WrestleMania. Like bollocks to those titles and what they represent.
Well, let us know your thoughts ahead of tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw in the comments section or on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Watch, they can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
You can follow Michael Sidgwick at
just follow me at Sidgwick. I really hope we hear the best on the awful.
Indeed. You can follow me at Adam Wilborn. You can follow our lovely editor Phil at Phil My Chambers. And again, follow us all at What Culture WWE and make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Myself and the Dudley Boys doing the Raw review tomorrow and me basically being unbearable if the Iconics win the tag titles. Thanks to everyone for your questions, for your contributions, for joining us, for your donations. And just a quick recap on the awful news surrounding ex-WWE superstar Shad Gaspard. Just some breaking news coming in through TMZ. He's currently missing after being pulled out to sea, courtesy of a riptide at Venice Beach on Sunday. He was swimming with 10-year-old son who was rescued, but the 39-year-old pro wrestler has been located. We're told that if you've seen him, please call 911 or DM his family. Our thoughts go out to them, of course. He's a huge friend of What Cultures. We got to hang out with him last WrestleMania weekend, and he couldn't have been nicer alongside JCG, of course, his Crime Time partner. We will keep you posted on this breaking news as it comes in, but our thoughts go out to him, and fingers crossed he's found soon enough. But for now, this has been the Raw preview. My thanks to the Dudley Boys. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.